So before we start, just a little more about myself. I've been with Imperva for 3 or 4 years, and I'm the product manager for Account Takeover, Advanced Bot Protection, as well as one of the newer products called Client-Side Protection. And with me, I have Erez.
Yeah, hi everyone. So Erez Hasson. I've been with Imperva for 5 years, recently transitioned to product marketing. I do product marketing for Advanced Bot Protection, Account Takeover, and Client-Side Protection.
So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Like Sarah said, today we'll be talking about account takeover and what kind of risks you can see your organization experiencing. So before we get into all of the exciting content, first, I'll quickly go through the agenda. So we're going to start off defining exactly what account takeover is and how your business can be negatively impacted. From there, I'll show you a quick demo of the product, and then Erez will take over and we'll give you some more information about the industries that are actually being hit the hardest, as well as some real ATO examples that our product has been able to protect. And then lastly, we'll give you some recommendations, like best security tips, and we'll end with a Q&A session. Okay, so I will kick it off. So to start off, what exactly is account takeover? So you can think of account takeover as the identity theft of the digital age. It's a form of identity theft where the bad actors gain illegal access to a user account that belongs to someone else. So this is usually done with some kind of brute force login technique, such as credential stuffing, credential cracking, or dictionary attacks. So this type of attack is actually no less dangerous than if someone were to steal your credit card or your driver's license in person, because then they can exploit your assets online just like how they can do it in the real world. So one reason that this attack is really hard to detect and mitigate successfully is because it actually exploits a legitimate website functionality, rather than some other attacks that we see where they try to exploit one or more unmitigated vulnerabilities. So an example of this would be like an obvious DDoS attack that then is protected by a WAF. So before we proceed any further, I'm going to define a couple terms so that we're all in the same page. So OWASP defines 2 automated threats that deal with credentials. The first is credential cracking, and the second is credential stuffing. So the first, credential cracking, refers to the brute force automated cracking, or the pairing of usernames and passwords using sophisticated bots to figure out the correct password for a username. So if your username was Bob Smith, they would try to find that one password that would unlock that username. So because this is so specific, they're going to be attacking a very specific website in mind or very specific username in mind. So on the other hand, credential stuffing refers to the method where an attacker has a list of compromised user credentials that they are trying to verify which pair of credentials are actually valid and can then be used to breach the account. So this attack uses bots for automations and scale. And this is based on the assumption that most users online are going to use the same or very similar passwords across multiple websites. So in case you didn't catch the commonalities between these 2 types of attacks, they both are using automation to orchestrate these attacks. And it's this automation that is also known as bad bots. In this presentation, we're going to be referring to credential stuffing more often due to the fact that this is actually seen online more often due to the abundance of available credentials that keep on fueling these attacks. So how exactly do account takeover attacks occur? So the very first step, as you can probably imagine, is that the hackers need to find or harvest many different usernames and passwords through the dark web. And this has really become quite easy for them to do, as there are so many data leaks and data breaches being announced pretty much every week that can be found on the dark web. Then the next step is they're going to use the bad bots to test these credentials. So they can be testing them either against one website, or they can test them against multiple websites to verify that they are correct and to match the usernames to the passwords. So once they do then find a credential that is actually valid, they then gain access to that user account, either on one website or multiple websites. And the last step, where they actually get the reward, they are now able to steal either monetary or PII assets from the user accounts that they were able to compromise. So why are hackers going through the trouble for all of this? And the simple answer is always money. The more complicated answer involves leveraging user account to gain money in other ways. So some examples of this are for them to sell validated credentials. So if they can sell a list on the dark web where they say that all of their credentials that they're selling are actually valid, they're going to be able to get a much higher price on the dark web. The second reason for why they want to do this is to sell other valuable data. So if they can hack into a lot of accounts and get credit card information or social security numbers, they're going to be able to get a lot more money for those complete profiles on the dark web. And lastly, they could be hacking into people's accounts for their own personal gain. So you can see a couple different examples on the screen. An easy example is if they want to buy products for themselves or other people that they know, and they're able to hack someone's e-commerce account and use the credit card on file to buy products and ship it for themselves. So we can tell that the ROI for these attacks keep on increasing because bad bots are becoming more and more prevalent across the web. And to show you really how prevalent they are getting, in 2020, 1 in every 4 requests on the web were actually made by bad bots. And the percentage of bad bot traffic actually rose by 6% from the year before. And this is a really mind-boggling statistic, especially when we consider that most people actually increased their time online in 2020 because of COVID. So this and many other interesting trends related to automated threats can be found online on our recently published Bad Bot Report. Now that we have established what account takeover actually is, let's learn a little more about what bad bots are and how they can cause trouble for your business. So just to get a definition, so bad bots are software applications that perform automated tasks with malicious intent. So some examples, they can be used to scrape data from sites. They can be used to crack credit card security codes, or like in the presentation that we're talking about today, they can also be used to crack your login credentials. On the other side, this differs from good bots, which are also automated, but they're actually used for good. So an example for this is the Google bot, and it also scrapes the web, but it does this with a good purpose of making it easy for everyone on the internet to be able to find websites quickly. Some additional crazy numbers that we wanted to share with you all. And these numbers really show just how prevalent and costly these attacks have become. Pretty much every single login page on the internet has some bad bot story. So the very first number, it's really crazy. Over a third of all login attempts that were recorded by Imperva in the last couple months were actually made by malicious actors. Another really crazy number to think of is that in 2019, a staggering 15.1 billion records were compromised. And it's these compromised records that keep on fueling the account takeover attacks that accounted for almost $17 billion loss in 2019. Another really concerning trend that we're seeing is that 65% of people are actually reusing their passwords across multiple sites, making it really easy for hackers to then gain access to not only their first account that they compromised, but then can use the credentials to try to compromise their other accounts. And I know that all of us are definitely guilty of sometimes reusing passwords online, even though we know it's not the best practices. So these attacks are really becoming more common every day, and they're causing havoc for everyone that's actually involved. So for everyone involved here, when an account takeover actually occurs, it really is a two-sided problem, because both the individuals that are using the service as well as the business owners end up being negatively impacted. So we'll start off with the individuals. So any individual people who have their login credentials stolen can end up seeing their accounts possibly locked up or having their identity stolen. They can also have their monetary assets stolen, so their credit card information or any loyalty points that they've built up for that specific e-commerce site. And lastly, like I said earlier, if hackers are able to gain access to one of their accounts, they can then try to get access to other accounts that that person has if they're reusing the same credentials. On the other side, for the owners of the business that are experiencing a large ATO attack, they can definitely end up seeing their brand reputation taking a hit, as well as customer churn occurring. For the monetary side, they might end up having to pay fines for non-compliance, as well as having increased costs for their support staff who have to deal with angry customers, or additional cost for infrastructure that has to deal with all of these additional login requests. So when you take into account all of the different possible repercussions for an ATO account, you can understand why it's so important to have a solution in place that can detect and mitigate it successfully. So up next, I want to show you some real-world examples of ATO attacks and how they can negatively impact your business. Okay, so the first example is a real example from one of our customers, and it shows just how dangerous even just one compromised user can be. So in this case, as you can see at the bottom, the user that was actually compromised was an admin account. And this is so dangerous because it's pretty much like finding the master key to the organization, which can then be used to access many other accounts. So thanks to ATO, the customer was able to be alerted in time, and they changed the password for their admin user. Another real-world example that you're probably more familiar with is the recently published SolarWinds attack. And this story truly demonstrates the ramifications of a successful ATO attack to a business. So to quickly walk you through the steps of how this attack actually occurred, first, attackers got hold of a compromised credential for one SolarWinds employee. Then, using that account, they were able to gain access to other accounts of personnel in that company that are in more useful roles, like business or technical roles, who have more access to systems. And then using those technical compromised accounts, the attackers were able to gain access and to exploit the Orion development environment, which then gave them access to many other companies' application. And that's really why this account takeover that started with just one, it really ended up blowing up to so many different people and companies being affected. And then the last example that I want to show you is what we like to call a mega account takeover attack. So on this one website, we actually saw 44 million ATO attempts being made over the course of just 60 hours. So it's really crazy. You can see at the top what a normal trend for this business actually looked like. So you can imagine that 44 billion over just 2 or 3 days really was able to overwhelm their infrastructure. And that's exactly what happens in these kinds of attack. If you don't have proper mitigation, this attack is not only a huge security issue, but also ends up hurting the infrastructure and overwhelming it. So this can end up having really increased infrastructure costs at best, and at worst, it can actually end up being a denial of service. So now that you're more familiar with the harmful consequences of what can come from an ATO attack, you're probably wondering if your existing tools can protect you. And unfortunately, the answer is usually no. So the first example is complex passwords. And this is definitely a very important first line of defense. But these can often be hacked, or we know that many passwords can be leaked, found online because they were leaked through a data breach. The second example is multi-factor authentication. And this is a really great second line of defense. But these can actually be stolen through spoofed login pages. The third is if you're trying to rely simply on IP reputation to block malicious activity. And this is actually a very short-term fix because new IPs are really easy and cheap to acquire, which means that if attackers realize that they are detected, they can very quickly and easily pivot to use a different IP and thus avoid detection. And lastly, if you are just trying to rely on your WAF to block the ATO attacks, you often end up with unmitigated attacks because, like we said earlier, WAFs are actually meant to deal with vulnerabilities, while ATO actually exploits legitimate business logic, which means that the WAF is really not the best tool to deal with this. And that's why this problem really requires a specialized tool. And that is where Imperva's account takeover protection comes in. So with Imperva's ATO, you get accurate and quick detection of attacks and advanced mitigation that is really easy to configure. So both of these aspects are important. So the first, accurate detection, could really lead to lower false positives that, if they occurred, could end up blocking real users. It also means that as bots evolve to avoid detection, our solution is able to continue identifying them as they change their identifiers. On the other hand, advanced mitigation is also super crucial, as ATO attackers are very ROI driven. And if they realize that they are being blocked, they will have to try more and more complex tactics to continue being successful. And if they realize it's too much effort, they might even end up stopping to target your site if they realize that the ROI is too low. So Imperva's ATO solution is safe and really easy to onboard without any code or application changes. It's also built as part of our single stack architecture. So ATO runs inline and can detect and mitigate attacks right away. You also get the benefit of crowdsourcing information across the large Imperva customer base, which means that our machine learning algorithm gets better every single day as we get more data from our hundreds and thousands of users. And lastly, ATO actually alerts you when it detects credentials that have been compromised or have been leaked through a publicly available data breach. And this can help you practice safer security by resetting resetting your compromised users' passwords so you can then prevent future ATO attacks. So now I will show you a quick demo of the ATO portal, and then Erez will kick us off. And of course, I have to log in again. So give me a second.
You want me to take over the industries and we can do the demo later? That can also work. It's up to you.
Oh no, it's fine. It should only take me one more second before I can log in. Perfect. So you all should now be able to see the Imperva portal. And specifically, now you're actually seeing the Account Takeover portal.
Lynn, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear.
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay. Great. So this is what the ATO portal looks like. To onboard to this portal, like we said, you don't have to make any code changes or application changes. There's just 4 easy steps that you need to do, and then your website or your login endpoint is onboarded. When you onboard, you automatically get visibility into the traffic right away. So here you can see some information that you can see. So the total login attempts that are being made, as well as out of that total, how many of those attempts are account takeover. And then we also give you the number of logins that were compromised. So that means the hackers were able to successfully log into them. And how many of those login attempts were you able to mitigate? We also give you some really important information about the leaked credentials. And here you can see some additional details. So we give you information about the actual usernames and which IPs they were used. Here, they're totally encrypted, but if you were the actual user running this account, you would create a password that then you would be able to use to decrypt all of these user names. So if you see usernames either popping up in the leaked credential section or in the compromised user section, you can then go and alert your users that they have been compromised and tell them that they need to go and reset their password. Down here, we give you some additional information that really helps you both from the security side and the fraud side to further investigate what exactly is happening. So like what client application they're using, different IPs, the reputation. And we also give you information about the successful users. So if you see that one username is logging in way more than anyone else in this list, that's something that you probably want to go investigate. Why is someone logging in 2 or 3 times more than someone else? It could be that something actually malicious is happening on their site. And just quickly going through the very quick configuration of the mitigation, the way that ATO works is it's risk-based. So we categorize everything as high, medium, or low. And it's really easy for you to configure how you want the mitigation to occur. So you just say, if something is a high risk attack, what mitigation do you want? Medium and low. And you can also simulate what that outcome is going to look like with the data from the last 30 days. So we really try to make this product as easy as possible for you to get the visibility and to mitigate as many requests as possible so that your login endpoint stays safe and available for all of your actual users to use.
Thanks, Lynn. And before we dive into the industries, it's important to understand again, every login page has its own bad bot story. And just adding the functionality of a login page to your website makes it susceptible to account takeover attacks. And more specifically, if there's money to be made by taking over an account on a certain website, the probability of an attack is pretty high. And each industry has its different incentives for attackers, which we're going to dive into now. So the first and probably the immediate suspect for account takeovers and bots in general is the travel industry. And what's interesting to see in this industry is that despite the impact of the pandemic, it's still one of the top priority targets for attackers, with 26.2% of all traffic in 2020 being bad bots. And actually, the travel industry accounted for 19.8% of all account takeover attacks in 2020. In this industry specifically, attackers are targeting the loyalty points, and more specifically, airlines with the air miles. And when people are not flying, air miles are accumulating. So that could be one explanation to that. And it is actually estimated that there are about $48 billion in unredeemed air miles just sitting in accounts, which just makes them a perfect incentives for attackers. So the main targets are loyalty points and even personal information like credit card numbers and passport numbers that can later be sold. And the main concerns for the industry are loss of consumer confidence, especially in an industry that's so competitive with an abundance of competition. People would just easily switch to the competition if they're not happy with your service. So another concern is customer support costs and the added cost of forensics and reimbursement for stolen points or credit card fraud. So let's take a look at an attack from this industry. And you may be familiar with this graph already after Lynn's demo and the previous examples. So this is another example of what we would call a mega account takeover attack with millions of attempts, as you can see by the blue color in here that shows the mitigated attempts. Now, this attack spanned for almost an entire month with like an on and off attack, and millions, 98% of the 27.8 million attempts were actually account takeover attempts. So not only was the customer able to mitigate this attack and maintain their flow of legitimate business, they were also able to avoid significant infrastructure costs that would have happened if this attack was not mitigated and that account takeover traffic would have gotten to their web server. Let's talk a little bit about the retail industry, another very favorite target, especially in a year where e-commerce and shopping on the internet has become much more popular. And one thing we've learned is that almost 80% of attempts for credential stuffing have been driven by leaked credentials in this industry. And it just goes to show how these leaked credentials are really the fuel for account takeover attempts. And the industry accounted for 15.5% of all account takeover attempts that we've seen in 2020. So the main targets in this industry for attackers are really the various forms of cash that are available inside the customer's accounts. It could be the prepaid gift cards. It could be loyalty points. Ideally, it would be a saved credit card that someone saved in order to make future purchases more easily. And these are very ideal because then attackers can use them to purchase other gift cards and vouchers, which are basically untraceable. So it's perfect for them. And the main concerns that this industry sees are the damage to customer lifetime value, because obviously in a industry like that, you would really want to maintain a good relationship with your customers, make sure that it's not just one deal that they're coming back and buying from you again. So customer retention is extremely important. You want to avoid brand damage. You want to avoid increased customer acquisition costs and customer support costs, and obviously avoid chargebacks from credit card fraud. So the example of the attack that we have here is a pretty interesting one, because if you look at it and you read what it says and you see that this big thing that looks like an attack to you actually just says total attempt, and you're asking yourself, why am I not seeing that blue color that says mitigated? Why didn't account takeover do anything in here? So this thing that looks like an attack to the human eye was actually a database error on the customer's end, and we were able to verify that with them. And why are we showing you this? Well, it's a good question. The reason is it just goes to show the efficacy of the system and the fact that it is able to use machine learning and data from our global network in order to figure out that this is not an attack and it doesn't prevent legitimate business from getting to that specific customer of us, thus not preventing and not making them have any losses. So again, it's a great example of avoiding false positives. Another top priority industry is financial services. We've actually recorded a significant increase in account takeover attacks on financial services towards the end of 2020 with 51% increase. Another interesting thing that we've seen in the industry is that 73.6% of the bad bots that we're seeing in this industry are actually classified by us as advanced persistent bots. Now, what advanced persistent bots are, they're basically a combination of sophisticated bad bots and moderate bad bots. Now, what that means simply is that they're very persistent on the target that they're looking after, and they're able to change their methods in order to avoid detection. So they're very hard to detect and to handle. They can do things like change your IP address, use a different client to browse the website, and more. And the main targets that attackers are usually looking for are personally identifiable information, or PII in short. It could be sensitive personal information like usernames, passwords, emails, etc. And it could be sensitive financial information like bank account, credit card information. And the main concerns for the industry are compliance with data privacy regulations, loss of PII, brand damage, customer frustration and dissatisfaction, increased fraud and customer support costs, as well as customer churn. The example of an attack that we've seen here is a pretty interesting one, and it really goes to show what advanced persistent bots are and what they're doing. So what you're looking at here is very normal login activity to a certain website until a point just around 4 p.m. when the customer disables account takeover in order to make changes on their end. And what happens almost immediately as they turn it off is that they get attacked because they have advanced persistent bots on this website just looking for a window of opportunity to launch an attack. And the moment they see it, they seize it and they attack. And as you can see, once mitigation is turned back on, which is by that blue section in there, the attack immediately stops and they just move on to another target. So it really is a good example of what advanced persistent bots are and how they're constantly testing login endpoints, looking for the opportunity to strike. And of course, it would be weird not to talk about healthcare in a year like the one that we're experiencing right now. So we've actually recorded a significant increase in attacks on the healthcare industry, and also a pretty significant proportion of bad bot traffic out of their total traffic, with 26.8% of bad bot traffic. Now, attackers targeting this industry are usually looking for protected health information, also known as PHI, but they can also be looking for sensitive research data or valuable intelligence that could be found within it. And the main concerns, as other industries are maintaining regulatory compliance, just one that's more relevant for the healthcare industry, like HIPAA and PHI, as well as avoiding customer frustration by their account lockouts and avoiding increased customer support costs, brand damage, and making sure they're protecting their trade secrets. So what we're seeing here is that before and after for an attack on the healthcare industry. So the before section on the left side, that yellow chunk of traffic is account takeover and millions of attempts. And the right side shows what happens after enabling account takeover. And what you're seeing there with the gray is just normal daily login traffic with high hours and low hours. So it really goes to show that having an effective account takeover solution basically prevents attackers from spending their time on your website. Attackers would always choose the easiest target. The moment they figure out it's protected, they're not going to waste their time or their resources on that website, and they're just going to move on to another website. And another industry that we have is the computing and IT services. And this one really circles back to the SolarWinds example. And this is probably why this was the highest, that had the biggest share of account takeover attacks in 2020. It actually accounted to almost a quarter of all of the attacks that we've seen. And it also had a significant proportion of bad bots targeting the industry. So really, attackers are targeting top level accounts, admin accounts, and they're looking for sensitive clientele information, because having access to admin accounts or top-level accounts that can then be used to inflict damages to companies that use these services really goes to show how this industry, and specifically targeting businesses in this industry, is the first link in the supply chain and can cause cascading damages to the customers relying on their services. So the main concerns would be significant brand damage, the risk of non-compliance, customer churn, customer support costs, and again, damages that can cascade to the customers. And just as we said before, really every login page is a bad bot story. And we've seen different attacks on many other sectors. Gaming and gambling can be targeted for high-value VIP accounts that have money in them. Entertainment and arts could be targeted for premium accounts that can later be sold. I don't know if you've had a chance, but if you look on the internet for subscription for accounts to specific streaming services, you can actually find people selling accounts to some certain streaming services. And I can assure you, no one has actually created that account and just sold it to you. Most of them are probably accounts that have been taken over. And then in the government sector, we've also seen attempts of accessing high-level officials' accounts in order to get sensitive information. So really, as long as there's money to be made, attacks will happen. And we want to give you some recommendations on how to identify account takeover attacks and how to handle them. And the first thing would be that you should keep an eye out for public data breaches, because these have been known to fuel these attacks. And sometimes we've seen an increase of up to 3 times more than usual in attacks that followed major data breaches. Another thing would be to look for spikes in traffic. You should probably be investigating unexplained spikes in your traffic on the login pages. At least try to understand whether or not it is legitimate traffic or not. And another thing that is a red flag is a great amount of unsuccessful login attempts. This is a very strong indicator of credential stuffing and credential cracking attacks. And the last thing, and this one was kept for last because it should be used with caution, is posing more friction on these pages in the form of capture, for example. And it should only be used in cases like a set amount of failed login attempts or during suspicious traffic spikes that are not sure why are they happening. And the reason why it should be used with caution is because it is not recommended to pose unnecessary friction on legitimate customers. It isn't a very nice experience going through a checkout process and being posed with a captcha challenge or a blocking page. So it should really be used with great caution. And last, you should consider trying an account takeover solution. So we're inviting you to try account takeover today. It's available now for eligible customers, and we also have a 30-day free trial available. So if you want to know whether or not you're eligible for it, you can log into the portal and press on the account takeover tab. If it looks like the left side where it says launch account takeover protection in blue button, then it means you're eligible and you can start using it right now. All you need to do is just press it and onboard your website. And if you don't, you could just start a free trial, which is available today as well. And you have a 30-day free trial. And last, if you want to learn more about bad bots and about account takeover in general, our new bad bot report for 2021 is now available on imperva.com. And you can also look out for a resource pack that we will be sending out in an email in the coming days. Thank you, guys. Questions?
Hi, Erez. We have had one question. Actually, let me just get it opened up here. And if anyone else has any further questions, please pop them into the chat. We'll be sure to get them answered for you. So the question we have here is, do you solve the possibility of bypass ATO mitigation with the following mitigation configuration: low, medium, high equals CAPTCHA? For an attacker to have just resolved one CAPTCHA and then he can brute force with no limit at all? Does that? I'm not sure if I've communicated that very well.
Yeah, I can answer that. So ATO is not going to mitigate in a different way than you set. So really, we don't recommend that people just CAPTCHA in all different levels, because you're really only giving yourself one way to mitigate. What we usually recommend for people is low, you can either do CAPTCHA or nothing. For medium, that's where you would do CAPTCHA. And then for high, you would do block. And that really allows you to escalate in more and more increasing challenges as a request's risk is raised. So in ATO, we can get a request and it starts out with no risk associated to it at all. And then as we see more that it's doing more things, or we see that it's been doing malicious things, let's say on a different website, then we will start escalating its risk. It might go, slowly, low, medium, high, or we could automatically just escalate it from nothing, no risk, to high risk. And that's really why we wouldn't recommend that you just select one mitigation strategy for all of your different risk levels. So no, we don't really have a way to mitigate the possibility of bypassing ATO. If you select CAPTCHA for everything, we would just recommend that you change your mitigation strategy if you don't see that mitigation strategy actually fits your needs. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you for that. We have another one here. If you redirect traffic to Office 365, will ATO still get required analytics?
So is Office 365 being used as an SSO, or how? I'm just trying to think exactly how it's being used. Pretty much how onboarding to ATO works is you need to find some success criteria that can be used to identify. So let's say you say that only successful requests are going to get a 200 code. So that can be used as your success criteria. If we see that, we know that the request was successful. If we don't see that, we know that the login attempt failed. So if you are still able to get some kind of differentiator as your success criteria, however you are flowing your data to Office 365, then yes, we are still going to be using it, be able to get all the required analytics. We don't support all different options for SSO and two-factor authentication. But if you do have any questions for if your use case works, you're more than welcome to talk to the support organization about your specific use case, and they'll definitely be able to help you onboard.
Are there any other questions to add to the discussion just now?
I got one direct question. Can Imperva's ATO protect both websites and mobile apps? And yes, we can protect against both of them. And then also, if you are also leveraging Imperva's advanced bot protection, which goes along with the ATO product, you're also able to use the mobile SDK over there and get full protection, not only for ATO, but also for any other bot use cases that might be targeting your mobile applications as well.
Okay, then we will leave it there. And if you have any more questions, please just pop them in the chat there or pop them onto community. Like I say, if anyone has arrived just now, expecting the session to start, I will be posting the recording on community, and I'll be sure to share it with all of the registrants. Thank you to Lynn and Erez for your time. It's been a really great session, and we will post it on community so that everyone can get it there, and any other questions can be posted there too. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.